In tonight's episode, we're diving into three terrifying tales from across Asia, each one darker than the last. The first takes us to the mystical island of Bali, a place known for its beauty but also for its shadows. Beneath the bright offerings and temple dances lies a curse that villagers fear to whisper aloud. They call it the leek. By day, the sorcerer seems like anyone else, blending into the crowd. But when night falls, something unholy stirs. A head rips itself free from its body, entrails trailing, eyes glowing in the black. It floats through the air, searching, hunting. And if it drifts above your roof, the curse is already sealed. Tonight, we begin with the story of the leek curse, a nightmare that marks not just a house, but an entire bloodline. The story begins with a young traveler named Dewa, a man who had grown up in the bustling streets of Denpasar but often returned to his grandmother's village deep in the heart of Bali. This time, his visit was not for a festival or a holiday. His grandmother had fallen ill, and the family believed her condition was not the result of age or sickness, but something darker. Dewa came with the hope of helping her recover, bringing medicine from the city and his own determination to keep her strong. Yet, as he stepped foot into the quiet village, the air felt heavier, as if it carried secrets that pressed against his chest. The village itself was nothing extraordinary at first glance. Rows of modest houses with stone walls and thatched roofs stood beneath the looming silhouettes of coconut palms. At night, the only light came from oil lamps flickering in windows, leaving long shadows to stretch across dirt paths. But it was not the silence that unnerved Dewa, it was the way neighbors avoided his gaze. Their whispers stopped the moment he passed. Some pressed their palms together in a quiet prayer. Others simply turned away, as though his very presence carried danger. When he arrived at his grandmother's home, he found her lying in bed, her skin pale, her breath shallow. His aunt explained that her condition had worsened suddenly. The local healer had tried everything, herbs, prayers, offerings at the temple, but nothing had helped. Instead, the crops outside their house had begun to wither. The chickens refused to lay eggs, and at night, a strange sound drifted through the village, a wet, flapping noise that made dogs howl and children cry. Dewa listened carefully, unease tightening in his chest. He remembered the old stories told by his grandmother when he was a child, stories meant to frighten him into obedience. Tales of the leek, a sorcerer who could detach their head, leaving their lifeless body behind, while the glowing skull floated through the night in search of prey. He had always laughed at those stories, dismissing them as superstition. But now, standing in his grandmother's home, he could not shake the feeling that the curse had returned. That night, Dewa lit incense by her bed and sat vigil, determined to stay awake. The air was still, the moon hidden behind clouds. Every creak of wood and rustle of leaves made his pulse quicken. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard it, the faint, dragging sound of organs moving through the dark. As the night deepened, Dewa sat by his grandmother's side, clutching a bundle of incense sticks that burned low in a clay dish. The smoke curled upward, twisting into strange shapes before fading into the shadows. He told himself it was just his imagination, that the shapes were nothing more than tricks of tired eyes. But then he noticed something odd. His grandmother's breath, which had been shallow but steady, seemed to change whenever the incense wavered. Each time the smoke thinned, her chest would rise with difficulty, as if something invisible pressed against her. When the smoke thickened, her breathing eased again. This pattern unsettled him, but he said nothing. He did not want to feed the fear already haunting the household. Yet, when his aunt came to check on them, she froze in the doorway, eyes darting to the incense. She whispered a prayer under her breath, then pressed a small packet of salt into Dewa's hand. "Scatter this at the door and windows," she urged softly. "Do it quickly, before it comes closer." Dewa frowned. "Before what comes closer?" His aunt didn't answer. She simply turned away, as though speaking the word would summon it. Left in silence, Dewa felt his unease grow heavier. He followed her instructions, sprinkling the salt across thresholds and windowsills. As the grains hit the wood and earth, he heard a faint hiss, like water striking hot metal. He bent down to listen more closely, heart pounding, but the sound was gone. By midnight, the village was swallowed in silence. The only sound was the occasional cough from his grandmother and the distant croak of frogs. But then, just as he thought he might finally drift into a light doze, he heard it. A noise unlike anything he had ever encountered. At first, it was faint. A wet, dragging flutter, like meat being pulled across the ground. It grew louder, closer, until he realized it was not coming from outside the house. It was above it. The roof groaned softly, as though something heavy pressed against it. Dewa's breath caught in his throat. He remembered his grandmother's old warnings. Never look up if you hear the leak. Never give it your eyes. For once it knows you've seen it, you are marked. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. Slowly, he rose from his chair and stepped toward the door. He pressed his ear against the wood, listening. The sound was directly overhead now, organs dragging, slapping wetly against the tiles. He could almost imagine a head with glowing eyes drifting above him, entrails trailing like the wings of some grotesque bird. Suddenly, the chickens in the yard erupted in panicked clucking, their wings beating frantically. The dogs began to howl, their cries sharp and terrified. Dewa's heart thudded in his chest. He reached for the latch, torn between fear and the need to know. But just as he was about to lift it, his grandmother stirred. Her eyes flew open, wide and bloodshot, her frail hand shooting up to grab his wrist with surprising strength. "Don't," she rasped, her voice hoarse but urgent. "Do not open that door." Dewa froze. His grandmother's hand trembled against his skin, yet her grip was iron. Her gaze flicked upward toward the roof, and tears welled in her eyes. She whispered something he could barely catch, words in an old dialect he hadn't heard in years. A prayer, a plea, maybe both. The sound above them grew louder, heavier, as if whatever was there had settled directly over the house. The walls seemed to pulse with it, the very air thick with dread. Dewa's mouth went dry. He realized now this was not just an illness, not just bad luck or superstition. Something was circling them in the night, and his grandmother knew exactly what it was. Dewa didn't sleep at all that night. When dawn finally crept into the village, he slipped outside to breathe air that wasn't thick with incense and fear. The sky was pale, but his relief was short-lived. Just beyond the family's gate, he noticed a line of footprints in the dirt, yet they were unlike any he had ever seen. Each print looked human at first glance, but the toes were stretched unnaturally long, curling into claw-like shapes that dug deep into the soil. The trail began in the middle of the road, circled the house twice, and then simply stopped, as if the creature had lifted itself into the air. When he told his aunt, she shook her head violently, pressing a finger to her lips. "Don't speak of it in the daylight. Words are invitations." Her warning sent a shiver through him. Still, he could not ignore what he had seen. Later that morning, a neighbor named Wayan came to the house, carrying a small bundle of flowers and rice wrapped in banana leaves. He placed it on the doorstep without knocking, then turned to leave. Dewa caught up to him and asked what the offering meant. Wayan avoided his eyes, muttering, "It is for protection, but protection will not last long. Your family has been marked." Dewa pressed him for answers, but Wayan only grew agitated. His voice dropped to a hiss. "Don't you understand? The leak always feeds where the bloodline is weakest. Your grandmother is only the beginning. You must leave, before it chooses another." The words unsettled Dewa more than he wanted to admit. But before he could respond, his aunt appeared in the doorway, her expression sharp. She told Wayan to go, accusing him of spreading fear that would only worsen the sickness. The two exchanged tense glares before Wayan finally walked away, muttering prayers under his breath. That night, Dewa tried again to stay awake. The sounds returned, organs dragging, chickens shrieking, but now there was something new. From the shadows outside came a voice, low and mocking, whispering his name. At first he thought he was imagining it, then it came again, clearer this time. Dewa. The sound slid through the air, neither male nor female, echoing like a chant from every direction at once. His aunt rushed into the room, clutching a wooden charm strung with black thread. She tied it tightly around his wrist, muttering words he didn't recognize. "Do not answer when it calls," she warned. "If you give it your voice, it will take more than words from you." The atmosphere in the house grew heavier with every passing hour. The walls seemed to creak and sigh, as though the very structure of the home resisted what lingered outside. Dewa sat frozen, his grandmother's labored breathing filling the silence, the strange charm digging into his skin. For the first time, he began to wonder if survival meant disobeying the one thing he had promised, staying by his grandmother's side until the end. The following night arrived like a storm, heavy and suffocating, though not a single cloud hung in the sky. The village seemed to hold its breath, no dogs barking, no frogs croaking. Even the insects had gone silent. Dewa sat by his grandmother again, the wooden charm still tight around his wrist, incense burning in every corner of the room. His aunt whispered prayers in the kitchen, her voice trembling more with each repetition. Then it began. A low thud on the roof, soft at first, like fruit falling from a tree, then another. Then a dragging, squelching sound, organs scraping against tile. Dewa's chest tightened. The noise moved slowly, deliberately, circling above them. His grandmother whimpered in her sleep, her body twitching as though she felt every movement overhead. The sound stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Then came a wet slap against the window. Dewa's head snapped toward it. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, pressed against the thin glass, a pale face appeared, eyes glowing like coals, lips curled into a grotesque grin. The head floated, entrails dangling, organs pulsing like diseased wings. Dewa's blood ran cold. The stories had been true. The leak was real. He stumbled backward, knocking over the clay dish of incense. The smoke thinned, and his grandmother gasped violently, as though the air itself had been stolen from her lungs. The head outside hissed, the sound sharp and venomous. The glass rattled, threatening to shatter under its weight. "Don't look at it," his aunt screamed, rushing into the room. She grabbed a bundle of dried leaves, lit them in the fire, and began waving the smoke toward the window. The leak shrieked, a sound so piercing it rattled Dewa's teeth. Its entrails writhed against the glass, smearing it with streaks of blood and bile. Suddenly, the front door banged open with a violent crash. Standing in the doorway was Wayan, the neighbor, his face pale but determined. He carried a bowl filled with some foul-smelling liquid. Without hesitation, he splashed it across the floor and walls, chanting in a language older than the village itself. The mixture hissed and bubbled, releasing a stench that made Dewa gag. The leak howled in fury, retreating slightly from the smoke and liquid, but then its eyes locked onto Dewa. The floating head pressed harder against the window, its jaw opening unnaturally wide, revealing teeth sharp as knives. And then, in a voice that gurgled like blood through a throat, it whispered his name. Dewa. The charm on his wrist grew hot, burning his skin. He clutched it desperately, torn between terror and rage. Why was it calling him? Why him? His grandmother? His family? What did it want? The room trembled as the leak slammed against the window again, harder this time. Cracks splintered across the glass. His aunt shouted prayers. Wayan poured the last of his mixture onto the floor. His grandmother thrashed in her bed, gasping for air. And in that moment, Dewa understood. The leak was not hunting at random. It had chosen him. The chaos reached a breaking point. The window shuddered, the cracks deepening, as if one more strike would bring the leak inside. Dewa clutched his wrist where the charm burned, every instinct screaming at him to run. But before he could move, Wei-Yen shouted something that silenced the entire room. "It is not her it wants you." The words froze Dewa in place. He stared at the neighbor, disbelieving. His aunt's prayers faltered, her eyes wide with horror. His grandmother groaned in her sleep, her chest rising and falling with painful effort. "What are you saying?" Dewa demanded, his voice trembling. Wei-Yen's face was pale, streaked with sweat, but his tone carried no hesitation. "The leak always feeds on the weakest link in a bloodline. That is what you were told. But weakness is not only illness or age. It is anger, doubt, the loss of faith. The leak doesn't just choose, it is drawn, and you, Dewa, you brought it here." The accusation struck like a blade. Dewa's mind reeled, remembering the unease he felt upon arriving, the villagers' averted eyes, the way even his aunt had grown tense around him. He had thought it was because of his grandmother's illness, but now he understood. They weren't afraid of her. They were afraid of him. Outside, the floating head snarled, its eyes glowing brighter, its entrails smearing against the glass like living chains. The sound of its organs dragging across the tiles above made the walls tremble. Wei-Yen threw another handful of salt onto the floor, his chants rising louder. "You must resist it. Do not answer when it calls. Do not let it break the bond of your family. If you give it your voice, it will own your soul." Dewa's chest tightened. He remembered the whispers from the night before, the voice that had slithered through the air, calling his name. He had nearly answered, nearly given in. His aunt grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. Tears streaked her cheeks, but her voice was firm. "Your grandmother has fought this before. That is why she always told us those stories. Not to scare us, but to prepare us. She survived because she never spoke its name. You must do the same. Hold your silence. Protect the bloodline." The revelation hit Dewa like a surge of cold water. The leak wasn't just an old legend to frighten children. It was a curse passed through generations, feeding on fear and weakness. His grandmother had endured it, and now it had turned its gaze on him. As the glass groaned and the creature pressed closer, Dewa finally understood. The night's horrors weren't random attacks. They were a test, and whether his family lived or died depended on what he did next. The glass finally gave way with a sharp crack, a jagged line running from corner to corner. The leak's head pressed through the gap, its glowing eyes fixed solely on Dewa. His aunt screamed, clutching the charm on his wrist, while Wei-Yen hurled the last of his salt at the window. The creature recoiled with a hiss, but not before its entrails scraped inside, dripping foul ichor onto the floor. Dewa stood frozen, his throat burning with the urge to answer the thing calling his name. His grandmother suddenly jolted upright, her eyes wide and clear for the first time in days. With a trembling hand, she pointed toward the door. "Go," she rasped, her voice stronger than it had any right to be. "Leave now." His aunt dragged him by the arm, pulling him outside into the cold night air. The village lay silent, every house dark, every window shut tight. Behind them, the house shook as the leak screamed, a sound that split the air like tearing flesh. They ran. Dewa didn't look back, though every instinct screamed that the glowing eyes were still on him, still following. When they finally stopped at the edge of the temple grounds, Wei-Yen collapsed to his knees, whispering prayers of thanks. Dewa caught his breath, staring into the distance where his grandmother's house lay swallowed in shadow. He wanted to believe she would survive, that the incense and salt would hold, but deep down, he knew the leak had not been banished. It had only been delayed. And somewhere in the darkness, he could still hear it, whispering his name. The story of the leak is terrifying enough, but across Asia, the darkness takes many forms. Each region has its own curse, its own nightmare that slips through the cracks of ordinary life. What binds them together is the same chilling truth: evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it hides behind familiar faces, waiting for nightfall. From Bali's cursed rooftops to the shadowed villages of West Sumatra, whispers speak of something just as horrifying. A curse that does not simply hunt once, but returns again and again, devouring families until there is nothing left. They call it the Palasik, and unlike the leek, it isn't satisfied with the weak or the old. Its hunger is far more innocent and far more merciless. In the highlands of West Sumatra, far from the noise of cities, lies a village surrounded by rice fields that shimmer like mirrors under the Sunday prastin. It is here that a young mother named Sari returned after years of living in Padang. Her first child was due in just a few weeks, and her family insisted she come back to the village, where the air was cleaner, the water purer, and the traditions stronger. They told her it would be safer here. But when she arrived, the villagers' eyes betrayed something different. They watched her too long, whispered when she passed, and tightened their doors as night fell. Her grandmother, a woman with a face carved by time, greeted her warmly but with a heaviness in her eyes. That night, while they sat in the dim glow of an oil lamp, she told Sari the stories she had hoped her granddaughter would never need to hear. Stories of the Palasik, not a beast with claws, not a demon of fire, but a curse that slipped from one generation to the next, like a shadow clinging to the blood. By day, the cursed ones could be neighbors, friends, even family. By night, their heads tore free from their bodies, trailing veins and dripping flesh, floating through the darkness in search of children. Sari laughed nervously, brushing it off as old superstition, but her grandmother's voice didn't waver. You must listen. The Palasik is not a story. It feeds on the innocent. It hunts the unborn, slipping through walls as easily as breath. It will come for you. The words settled like stones in Sari's chest. She wanted to argue, to tell her grandmother the world had moved past such fears. But, as she lay in bed later that night, she couldn't shake the unease. The house was too quiet, the shadows too thick. And then came the sound, faint but clear, a baby crying, though there were no infants in the house. It rose and fell, drifting across the rice fields like mist. Her grandmother knocked softly on her door and whispered through the wood, "Do not answer. Do not open your eyes if you feel a presence." Sari lay frozen beneath her blanket, the phantom cries echoing in her ears. She told herself it was only the wind, only her imagination. But deep down, she knew she was no longer safe. She had come home to protect her child. Instead, she had walked straight into a curse older than the village itself. The first days passed quietly, or at least that was how it seemed. Sari helped her grandmother with small tasks around the house, sweeping the wooden floor, preparing simple meals, and resting when her body grew heavy with exhaustion. But there was an unease that never left her. Every evening, just as the sun slipped behind the mountains, the village seemed to shut itself down. Doors closed early, lamps were extinguished quickly. No one lingered outside after dark. At first, she assumed it was just the custom of a remote place, but then she began to notice details that unsettled her. The neighbors greeted her politely in the daylight, but their eyes always lingered on her swollen belly. One woman muttered a prayer under her breath as Sari passed, clutching her child closer. Another man quickly spat into the dirt, a gesture she remembered from childhood as a ward against evil. Her grandmother explained nothing, only urged her to stay indoors once the sky turned red. That was when the strange things began. The first incident happened late one night. Sari woke to the sound of something scratching against the wooden walls of the house. Slow, deliberate scrapes, as though fingernails dragged along the planks. She froze, holding her breath. The scratching moved around the house, circling it, until it stopped right beneath her window. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then came the sound of something wet, like meat slapping against stone. Her skin prickled. She wanted to look, but her grandmother's warning echoed in her mind. Do not open your eyes if you feel a presence. The next morning she tried to dismiss it. Perhaps it had been an animal, a stray cat or dog. But when she went outside, she found no prints in the soil. Instead, the ground looked scorched, as if heat had licked the earth in uneven patches. She said nothing, but unease gnawed at her. And then, on the third night, the crying began again. Not her own child, she hadn't yet given birth, but the same phantom wail she had heard before. It came closer this time, weaving through the rice fields, carrying on the wind. Sari sat upright in bed, pressing her hands against her stomach, her heart racing. The cries grew louder, then stopped abruptly, leaving only silence so thick it hurt her ears. Moments later, a knock rattled the door. Soft, insistent. She crept to the main room, where her grandmother already waited, holding a bundle of salt and betel leaves. The old woman pressed her finger to her lips, signaling silence. The knocking came again, harder this time, though no shadow moved against the paper windows. Finally, the sound stopped. Her grandmother placed the salt across the threshold and muttered a prayer. Sari could barely breathe. The following day, she confronted her grandmother, demanding answers. The old woman sighed deeply, her eyes heavy with sorrow. The palisic feeds on what is not yet born. When a baby cries where no baby exists, it means the curse is near. It is looking for a way inside. Sari's blood ran cold. She realized then that the village wasn't shutting its doors out of habit. They were barricading themselves against something that chose its victims carefully. And she, carrying new life, was the one most exposed. The days that followed only deepened Sari's fear. Sleep became impossible. Each night brought new disturbances that left her weaker, her mind fraying at the edges. The phantom cries grew closer, sometimes circling the house, sometimes echoing inside her very room. She would jolt awake with the sensation of icy hands pressing against her stomach, though when she screamed for her grandmother, no one was there. One evening, a neighbor named Rahman came to visit. He was older, with sharp features and a stare that unsettled her. He brought a small basket of fruit, insisting it was a gift for her health. Yet, the way he lingered, his eyes fixed not on her face but on her swollen belly, filled her with unease. Her grandmother accepted the basket with a forced smile, but the moment he left, she carried it outside and threw every piece into the fire. Why would you do that? Sari demanded. Her grandmother's voice was grim. Not every gift is given with kindness. Some are meant to bind you, to weaken you. The implication was clear. Sari's heart pounded as a thought crept in, unbidden. Could Rahman be one of them? A Palasik hiding behind the mask of a neighbor? That night, the disturbances grew violent. The scratching returned, louder and more erratic, as though claws raked at the wood with desperation. Then came the thud of something heavy landing on the roof. The house groaned under the weight, dust sifting down from the rafters. Sari clutched her stomach, whispering prayers she barely remembered. Her grandmother rushed into the room carrying a bundle of dried herbs wrapped in red cloth. She set them aflame and waved the smoke toward the ceiling. The weight above shifted, followed by a low hiss that made Sari's blood run cold. It was not the hiss of an animal. It was human, angry, mocking. When the noise finally faded, her grandmother sat heavily beside her, sweat dripping down her lined face. She took Sari's hands and whispered, "Listen to me. The Palasik is not only a curse. It is a hunger passed down. Once it marks a family, it does not stop until the bloodline is gone. That is why the village watches you. They are afraid you carry more than a child. They fear you carry the curse itself." The words struck harder than any sound in the night. Sari's breath caught in her throat. Was the danger outside her home or inside her blood? The next morning, as she walked through the village, whispers followed her. Mothers pulled their children closer. Some muttered prayers, others spat into the dirt. And among them, Raman watched her again, his lips curling into the faintest smile. That night, when the phantom cries returned, Sari could no longer tell if she was hearing a threat or the echo of her own blood calling back. The night of the full moon came, and with it, the village seemed to shrink into itself. Doors bolted tighter, lamps extinguished earlier than ever before. Even the dogs, usually restless, lay silent with their ears pinned back. Sari sat inside with her grandmother, the air heavy with incense smoke and the faint metallic scent of burned offerings. Every corner of the house glowed dimly, but no light could push away the dread pressing down on her chest. She tried to rest, but then it came, the cry. This time it was not distant, not weaving through the rice fields. It was inside the house, thin and shrill, like a newborn wailing for its mother. Sari's blood ran cold. She pressed her hands to her stomach, feeling her own child twist and kick violently as if in protest. Her grandmother rushed to her side, clutching a blade smeared with lime and turmeric. "Do not answer," she warned, her eyes wild. "Do not call to it. This is not a child. It is a lure." But before Sari could respond, the roof groaned, the sound of flesh dragging across wood. Something heavy slid down the wall. And then, silence. She held her breath. Slowly, she turned her eyes toward the window. And there it was. A head floated just beyond the thin paper screen, hair trailing in tangled clumps, veins and intestines dangling like grotesque ribbons. Its eyes glowed faintly red, its lips pulled into a grin that showed too many teeth. The wailing cry still filled the room, but the creature's mouth never moved. Sari's scream caught in her throat. She wanted to look away, but the eyes held her, pulling at something deep within her chest. The baby inside her kicked harder, harder, as though trying to escape. She felt an icy pressure spread across her stomach, invisible hands probing, pressing, searching. Her grandmother lunged forward, slashing the blade through the air, shouting words in a dialect Sari didn't recognize. The creature hissed, the sound vibrating through the wood. The paper screen trembled, the faint outline of its entrails writhing like serpents. Suddenly, the wailing stopped. Silence, thick and suffocating, filled the house. Then the creature spoke. Not in whispers, not in cries, but in a voice that echoed inside Sari's skull. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed to the floor, clutching her stomach. Her grandmother knelt beside her, forcing the charm of herbs against her skin. "Fight it!" the old woman cried. "It is not yet bound. Resist, or it will claim your bloodline forever." The pressure grew unbearable. Sari's vision blurred, her body trembling as though her veins were being pulled from the inside. She realized, with horror, that this was not just an attack from outside. The palisic was inside her blood, reaching for her child, trying to tear it free before life even began. For the first time, she understood why the villagers looked at her with fear. She wasn't only a target, she was the door. The room stank of smoke and sweat, of blood that wasn't there yet seemed to hang heavy in the air. Sari lay trembling on the floor, her grandmother's hands pressed firmly against her stomach, chanting prayers that shook with desperation. The floating head outside scraped along the wall, its entrails slapping wetly against the wood, but it no longer pushed to get in. It didn't need to. It had already found its way inside her. Her grandmother's voice broke as she spoke, not to the creature, but to Sari. "Listen to me. The Palasik is not only a curse that comes from outside. It lives in the blood. It is passed down through families like a hidden sickness. That is why you were brought back here, not just to be protected, but to be contained." The words struck like cold iron. Sari stared at her grandmother in shock, her breath ragged. You knew? Tears welled in the old woman's eyes, but she nodded. Our family has carried this shadow for generations. Some fight it, some fall to it. The villagers know. That is why they shut their doors when you came. They fear the curse clings to you and to the child you carry. Memories tumbled back, neighbors staring at her belly. The fruit basket burned without explanation, the whispers following her every step. They weren't simply being cruel. They were afraid of what she represented, afraid of what she might become. Outside, the palisic hissed again, a sound that reverberated through her bones. Sari clutched her stomach, feeling her baby kick as though it too sensed the truth. But why me? Why now? She whispered. Her grandmother's gaze was heavy. The palisic feeds where the bloodline is most vulnerable. A child not yet born is the easiest to claim. If you give in, if you let the hunger take root, it will not only devour your child, it will turn you into one of them. You will wear the face of a neighbor by day, and by night, you will hunt. The realization struck harder than any terror she had faced so far. This was not just about survival, this was about inheritance. The curse was not something that stalked her from the fields, it lived in her veins, waiting for weakness, waiting for permission. Sari pressed her hands against her belly, her breath trembling. She had come home believing the village would protect her, but the truth was far darker. The protection was never for her, it was against her. And as the creature's shadow slid across the window once more, she understood the truth she had been running from since her first night back. The Palasik had not come to find her. It had come to claim what was already its own. The house seemed to exhale as the scratching outside faded, leaving only silence. The oil lamp flickered low, casting shadows that seemed to crawl along the walls. Sari sat trembling, her grandmother's words echoing in her mind. The curse lived in her blood. Not something to fight off with salt or prayers, but something waiting to awaken inside her. Her grandmother pressed the charm of herbs tighter against her skin, whispering, "You must be stronger than those who came before. If you falter, the curse will take root." But even as she spoke, Sari felt it, the faintest, stirring beneath her ribs. Not the kick of her child, but something colder, hungrier. It moved differently, like veins tightening, like blood flowing in the wrong direction. Her breath caught. For the first time, she wasn't sure if the baby inside her was fighting against the Palasik or if it was already becoming one. The lamp sputtered out, plunging the room into darkness. In that moment of black silence, a sound rose again, soft and chilling. A baby's cry. But this time, it came from inside her belly. Her grandmother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sari froze, heart hammering in her chest. She didn't dare move, didn't dare speak. And then, just as suddenly, the cry stopped. The night was still, too still. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed too early, as if trying to push dawn into existence. But for Sari, the question remained, had the curse been kept at bay, or had it already claimed her child? I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you like them and want to listen to more, feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications. I upload almost every day. Wish you all the best. From Bali's cursed rooftops to the haunted bloodlines of West Sumatra, we've seen how terror clings to families and villages. But not every horror waits behind closed doors. Some walk the roads we travel every day, waiting for the unlucky to cross their path. In the heart of Metro Manila, where traffic never sleeps and neon lights blur against the rain, there's one stretch of asphalt drivers whisper about, a place they'll avoid no matter how long the detour. Because there, beneath the twisted roots of ancient trees, another legend waits. Not a curse passed through blood, but a woman in white doomed to wander the night. They say if you see her once, you'll never forget her. If you see her twice, you might not survive at all. June had been driving taxis in Metro Manila for nearly a decade. The city at night was his territory, neon lights flickering across wet pavement, the endless hum of jeepneys and tricycles, the quiet desperation of passengers flagging him down at odd hours. He worked the night shift because it paid more, and because, as he often joked, the dead hours of the city didn't scare him. But deep down, June knew there was one place he would never go after midnight: Balete Drive. Everyone in his line of work knew the stories. A narrow, tree-shrouded road in Quezon City where accidents happened too often, where cab drivers whispered of picking up passengers who weren't really there. Some said it was cursed because of the massive Balete trees lining the street, their roots tangling like veins across the pavement. Others claimed it was a woman, a restless ghost who preyed on drivers foolish enough to stop. Jun brushed off the tales whenever they came up, laughing them away with a cigarette dangling from his lips. But he never, ever drove that shortcut. Until tonight. It had been raining hard for hours, and the city was drowning in gridlock. The storm scattered branches across the main roads, trapping cars in unmoving lines. His passenger earlier had bailed halfway, throwing bills at him before slipping into the storm. With an empty cab and a rising fare quota to meet, Jun found himself staring down the narrow turn that led to Balete Drive. The headlights barely cut through the sheets of rain, but he could see the twisted trees looming, their roots crawling across the wet ground like skeletal hands. He gripped the wheel tighter, muttering a curse under his breath. It was just a road. Just another damn shortcut. He told himself he didn't believe the stories, that he was too tired to care. But the moment his tires rolled onto the slick asphalt, he felt it, an unnatural quiet pressing in. The city's endless noise seemed to vanish, leaving only the hiss of rain on metal. June lit another cigarette, the glow of its tip briefly illuminating his weary face in the mirror. He kept his eyes on the road, but his pulse quickened as the trees seemed to close in tighter with every meter. The cab smelled faintly of damp earth now, though he hadn't picked up anyone since the rain began. He rolled the window down a crack, but the air that entered was colder than it should have been. For the first time in years, Jun wondered if the stories weren't just rumors meant to scare rookies. And as he passed the first massive Balete tree, its branches sagging low over the road, he felt the unsettling certainty that he was no longer alone. The rain pounded harder as Jun's cab crawled down Balete Drive, the wipers screeching across the windshield in frantic, uneven strokes. The trees leaned low, their twisted branches forming a tunnel that swallowed the headlights. Jun kept his eyes locked on the narrow strip of road ahead, refusing to glance into the shadows. Then he saw her. At first, she looked like any other stranded pedestrian, barefoot, standing in the downpour, her white dress plastered to her skin. She raised one arm weakly, signaling for a ride. Jun's stomach dropped. Every story he'd ever heard came crashing back. The White Lady of Balete Drive. He gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles went pale. For a long, terrible second, he thought of driving past. But her figure wavered in the rain, fragile and drenched. Conscience, or maybe curiosity, won. With a muttered curse, he pulled the cab to a stop. The rear door opened with a slow creak, though he swore he hadn't seen her hand touch the handle. Water dripped onto the seat as she slid inside. Her voice, barely above a whisper, floated forward. To Manga Subdivision. Jun forced a nod, flicking his cigarette out the window. All right, hold on. He pulled away, heart thundering. For a while there was nothing but the roar of rain and the hum of the engine. But soon he noticed something strange. The air inside the cab had grown colder, sharp enough that his breath fogged the glass. He glanced at the rearview mirror and froze. She was there, sitting stiffly, her long black hair veiling her face. But her reflection didn't match. In the mirror, her head turned slower than her body, lagging a half-beat behind, like an old film reel out of sync. Jun snapped his eyes back to the road, pulse hammering. He told himself it was just fatigue, a trick of the rain. But when she spoke again, giving another direction, "Turn left, here," her lips in the mirror barely moved. He followed the turn anyway, anything to keep the ride moving toward its end. The cab crawled past another leaning Balete tree, roots sprawled across the wet ground like veins. Jun realized, with a creeping chill, that he'd already seen this exact tree and the sagging power line beside it, and the cracked pavement with the same pothole. His eyes darted to the mirror. The woman hadn't moved. A sick realization gripped him. He wasn't driving forward, he was looping. Over and over, the same stretch of road, the same tree, the same directions, whispered from the back seat. The meter flickered suddenly, its red numbers sputtering into nonsense before dying altogether. The dashboard lights dimmed, the engine groaning, as if choked by something unseen. Jun slammed his palm against the steering wheel, muttering a curse under his breath. And then he felt it. Cold. Not from the storm outside, but from the seat directly behind him. A damp chill pressing forward, creeping toward his shoulders. He didn't dare look in the mirror again. Instead, he gritted his teeth, eyes fixed on the road. Yet, deep down, he knew he wasn't the one in control anymore. The rain refused to let up. It hammered the roof of the cab so hard Jun could barely hear his own breathing. Yet, despite the storm, the woman's whispers carried clearly into the front seat, every syllable cold and deliberate. Left again, then straight. He obeyed, though unease clawed at him. The tires sloshed through the same puddle he had crossed minutes ago, the same sagging tree looming overhead. His throat tightened. He was trapped in some kind of circle, and the woman in white was guiding him deeper into it. At the next intersection, a pair of headlights appeared, another taxi cutting through the rain. Relief surged in Jun's chest. He wasn't alone. He slowed slightly, rolling down his window as the other cab pulled closer. The driver inside, an older man with sunken eyes, leaned across his seat and shouted over the storm. "Balete?" he barked, his voice raw. "Turn back, boy. Don't take passengers here." Jun's stomach dropped. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the old driver's expression twisted. His eyes widened in horror as he stared past Jun into the back seat. He shouted something unintelligible, slammed his fist against his dashboard, and then sped off, tires screaming against the wet asphalt. Jun's hands shook against the wheel. He wanted to demand answers, but the air in the cab grew colder still. In the mirror, the woman hadn't moved, yet her reflection slowly tilted its head, watching him. "Straight ahead," she whispered again. Jun swallowed hard, his voice finally breaking the silence. "Look, it's late. Where exactly are we going?" No response, just the sound of rain and the faint drip of water hitting the leather seat behind him. He risked another glance in the mirror. This time her mouth moved, slow and deliberate, but the words came a full second later. "You will see soon." A chill spread across Jun's chest. His instincts screamed at him to stop the car, to force her out, but his body felt heavy, as if the steering wheel itself held him hostage. The cab crawled forward, meter dead, dashboard lights flickering in and out like a dying heartbeat. Then came the smell. Damp earth, sharp and metallic, like wet soil mixed with rust. Jun gagged, cracking the window wider, but the stench only grew stronger, rising from the back seat. He dared one more glance in the mirror and froze. Muddy footprints had appeared on the leather, pressed into the seat where no shoes had touched. Small at first, then larger, blooming across the fabric. They stretched upward, toward the headrest, toward the ceiling. Jun's pulse thundered. He realized with dawning horror that the woman was no longer sitting. She was standing inside the moving cab. And yet, when he turned his head ever so slightly, the back seat was empty. Jun's grip on the wheel was slick with sweat, his knuckles white against the trembling leather. The rain roared on, but inside the cab, another sound crept in, a slow, deliberate tapping, as though wet fingers drummed against the glass. He glanced at the passenger window. Nothing. The tapping shifted to the rear windshield, then the roof, a rhythm that seemed almost human. The dashboard lights flickered, then died completely, leaving only the ghostly glow of the headlights cutting through the rain. The engine sputtered, coughing like it might give out at any second. Jun's pulse hammered in his ears. "Where do you want to go?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Tell me where to stop." Silence. He flicked his eyes to the mirror. The woman was still there, slumped in her seat, hair hanging in wet ropes over her face. But her reflection was smiling. Wide. Crooked. Lips peeling back to reveal shattered teeth, glistening with tar. Jun's breath caught. He snapped his gaze forward again, heart hammering. The cab jolted violently, the steering wheel wrenching in his hands. He slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a halt beneath another looming Balete tree. The silence after was unbearable. No engine, no meter, only the hiss of rain. Then, a soft creak, the rear door opening. Jun didn't look, he couldn't. But no air rushed in, no weight shifted the car. He forced himself to glance at the mirror. The back seat was empty. His lungs seized with relief, until muddy footprints began to bloom across the leather once more, one after another, leading upward, across the seat, across the glass. He turned his head just in time to see the condensation on the window shift, as if someone pressed their palm against it from the inside. The handprint slid higher, then vanished. Jun's chest heaved. He fumbled for the ignition, twisting the key again and again. Nothing. The engine coughed once, then fell silent. And then he saw her. Outside the cab, just inches from his driver's side window, stood the woman. Her veil clung to her face, rain dripping from the ends of her long black hair. Slowly, she leaned closer, until her face nearly touched the glass. Jun froze. The veil shifted, rising just enough to reveal what lay beneath. Her mouth stretched impossibly wide, jaw broken, lined with jagged teeth slicked in black. Her eyes locked onto his hollow and unblinking. The tapping returned, this time against the inside of the windshield. He looked forward and saw it, another handprint forming in the condensation, then another and another from the inside. Jun realized with horror he wasn't trapped in the cab with her, she was already inside. The cab tore forward on its own, headlights slicing through sheets of rain, as if pulled by unseen hands. Jun gripped the wheel but felt no control, his breath ragged, his heart slamming against his ribs. The trees leaned closer, their branches scraping the roof like claws. Then, without warning, the road opened. Streetlights flickered ahead, the glow of Quezon City's main avenue cutting through the storm. Jun's chest heaved with relief as the cab rolled back into familiar traffic, horns blaring, jeepneys weaving past. It was as if Balete Drive had simply released him. He pulled over to the curb, shaking, desperate to breathe. Slowly, he turned to the back seat. Empty. No footprints. No dripping water. Just silence. A weak laugh escaped him. Maybe he had imagined it. Maybe exhaustion had twisted his mind. He rubbed his face, preparing to drive again. But then, he saw it. In the rearview mirror, a wet handprint gleamed on the inside of the glass, slowly dripping down toward the dash. His blood ran cold. He turned his head. Nothing there. He looked back into the mirror, and the handprint was joined by another, and another. his breath caught in his throat, because this time the handprints weren't fading, they were multiplying. By dawn, Jun parked his cab at the depot and never drove Balete Drive again. But from that night on, every mirror he passed, shop windows, bathroom stalls, polished glass, reflected the same thing. A pale, wet handprint, always on the inside. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you like them and want to listen to more, feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications. I upload almost every day. Wish you all the best.